This video is now in session, and the Texas 6th Congressional District election just happened 2 days ago, I believe. It happened May 1st, and we have the results. So in this preliminary election, Susan Wright had 19.2%, and Jake Elzy had 13.8%. Both of them are Republicans, and because Texas works in a jungle primary system, Jake Elzy and Susan Wright advance to a runoff election, while the rest of the candidates do not. So what's notable about this is that you see that there's no Democrat that advanced to the runoff. Jana Sanchez was the closest and was only less than 400 votes short of winning the opportunity to go to a runoff, but she ultimately did not. And that's a huge setback for Democrats, because if Democrats campaign like this, they are definitely 100% not going to win the 2022 election. There were a lot of things that Democrats did not do right about this race, and more than just Democrats, it's also a race and a test for Donald Trump to see if he exerts any influence in a semi-competitive race. So, first, it's embarrassing to see that Democrats are not in the runoff when this is a Trump plus 3 seat and an R plus 6 district. It's not like it's an R plus 20, like in Louisiana's 5th district, but the fact that they weren't able to get to the runoffs it's pretty poor in terms of their performance. And for the Texas Democrats, it's another setback because they really messed up in 2020, and this is just another election of mess ups. So ultimately, it's something that Democrats will have to reflect on and improve on in the 2022 election. So what could Texas Democrats have done better? First, they definitely needed to actually do something about this race. For this race, a lot of Texas Democrats and a lot of national Democrats did not really focus much on the candidates here. They were very reluctant to talk about this race, which meant that a lot of Democrats did not come out and vote. Meanwhile, you saw Donald Trump endorse Susan Wright. Even though it was last minute, there was an endorsement that helped Susan Wright and propelled the race for Republicans. So as a result, you saw Republicans turn out, but Democrats not turning out. You didn't see Joe Biden endorse a candidate. You didn't see someone even popular in local politics like Beto O'Rourke play a huge part in this race, and that shows in this special election where Jana Sanchez, who had the highest chance of winning, did not get through even to the second round. The second thing is that Democrats did not coalesce, and this kind of relates to the first point about national Democrats not playing a role. By the fact that they're not playing a role, they're not endorsing a particular candidate, and they're not narrowing the field for them to be able to win the preliminary election. So you see multiple Democrats on this ballot. You see Jana Sanchez, you see Sean Lasseter, you see Tammy Allison, and then Lydia Bean. If you gave any of these votes to Jana Sanchez, she would have been in the runoff. With less than a 400 vote margin between Jake Elzy and Sanchez, you could have Sean Lasseter give some of her vote over to Jana Sanchez, and that would have put Democrats in the position of actually being able to go to the runoff. Even if you go to some more obscure candidates like Patrick Moses or Manuel Salazar, if you transferred their vote over to Jana Sanchez, that would have been enough for her to win the preliminary election. And in some ways, this race is very similar to the Georgia Senate special election, the one involving Raphael Warnock and Kelly Loeffler, because in that election, that was a special election that also worked in a jungle primary, where in the months before the actual election, you saw a lot of Democratic candidates, particularly Raphael Warnock, as well as Paul Lieberman, and as well as Ed Tarver. So you saw all three of these candidates, who are all Democrats, trying to go for the jungle primary system in Georgia's Senate election. So there was a chance for Kelly Loeffler and the other Republican who was the major player in that race, Doug Collins, to advance to the runoffs, completely shutting out Democrats from that race. But Barack Obama endorsed Raphael Warnock, and other Democrats said that Ed Tarver and Paul Lieberman had to step out of the race, and as a result, their influence became much more muted. If the same thing happened with this race, then Janet Sanchez would have had an easy path to the runoffs. But the second thing, though, is that if you combine every Republican and every Democrat's vote share, it is 61% for Republicans and 39% for Democrats. That is a horrible showing for Democrats. And it shows that they did not turn out their vote, especially in Tarrant County, where most of their vote can come from. You saw that Susan Wright was able to win that county in comparison to Jana Sanchez, who lost by 2 percentage points from Susan Wright. So it's not good for Democrats, certainly not. Now, there are arguments, though, to give that Democrats really shouldn't have spent money on this race because of redistricting. Redistricting is going to happen very soon for Texas, and they're bound to make the 6th Congressional District much more Republican. So, yeah, there are obviously arguments for that, but it's like what Stacey Abrams said. For Democrats to win in Republican states, you have to fight in every single election. Even in elections where you think you might lose, or you might lose in the long term, you still have to fight in, because it shows to the constituents that you are trying to garner their vote, while the Republican Party is not. So that's how Stacey Abrams was able to win in Georgia. But if Democrats don't do that nationwide with Republican districts, then they're not going to be able to win in the future. They're not going to be able to get the crucial Sunbelt states that are necessary for Democrats to maintain prosperity. They're not going to be able to flip the Texas Senate seats. They're not going to be able to continue to have those kinds of Georgia and Arizona flips in the Rust Belt. So it's not a good sign if Democrats are campaigning like this. Now, certainly, they're probably not going to campaign like this in 2022. They're obviously going to fight a lot harder, but if they do something remotely like this kind of strategy, they are not going to win the House, because just through redistricting alone, Republicans have a really good chance of winning in the House. So so Democrats have to fight hard if they want to have a sliver of a chance of maintaining their already thin majority. And it seems like that they're not going to even try it based on this congressional district. And even though it's going to be redistricted very soon, that doesn't mean Democrats should not fight for this seat, because their constituents in Tarrant County that they get their vote from will probably be redistricted into another district that will be competitive. So it's something that they still could capitalize on, and thus even though it might be right for them to not pour millions of dollars into this race, they should have at least tried a bit in order to get through the runoffs and to narrow the race, to show that they actually have a chance of doing good in the 2022 election. But Democrats aside, there's also another lesson to take away from this, which is the Trump factor. So on the Republican side, Susan Wright, there was really no Trump. I mean, there was no prominent Trump representative or a Trump candidate from the Republican side. So as a result, we saw that this race was a lot more favorable to Republicans, and that is a lesson in itself, which is that for Republicans to win, they don't have to split themselves away from Trump, and they don't have to be incredible. They don't have to kiss Trump's butt. But what they can do is align themselves with Trump voters based on his policies and mentioning his name a couple of times, and that's able to get them very far. That's what Susan Wright did, that's what Jake Ellzey did, and Susan Wright ultimately got the endorsement from Trump which did not quite hurt in this race. And that's another big lesson, which is that with Trump not being president, Republicans start to do better in these races. And we'll see if this trend holds up in 2022. But based on this election, it would. Now, in terms of anti-Trump, going against Trump, there was only one prominent candidate that did that, which was Michael Wood. And Michael Wood did poorly. He only got 3.2% of the vote, and while he was not the front runner and he was not projected to go off to the runoffs, he was expected to do better than 3.2%, which shows that the anti-Trump kind of strategy Republicans are taking, or some Republicans are taking, or not. It's not a good strategy. At least in a jungle primary, because what a jungle primary does is it puts Democratic voters to vote with Democrats and Republican voters to vote with Republicans, and that works like any other election. But you're incentivized in this kind of jungle primary to go more to the right or to go more to the left to get more of your base, because that's the easiest strategy you can have in the 2020 election. It's not about turning Democrats to you, or turning Democrats into Republicans, or turning Republicans into Democrats, because that's a particularly hard strategy for a race that is packed with 23 individuals. So for Democrats, there is going to be a candidate that fits their policies, and the same goes for Republicans. So trying to appeal to the other side and trying to appeal to only one part of the party is just not the way to go in future elections. But it also shows that the anti-Trump kind of candidate does not do well, and that kind of reaffirms Trump's base a bit. But we'll see if this holds on in 2022. Now, in terms of what happens at this point, the only lesson from the runoff election that we will have is if Trump helps a candidate or if Trump tarnishes a candidate. So Susan Wright got the endorsement from Trump, Jake Ellazey did not. But before this, Jake Ellazey did campaign heavily as a Trump candidate, but Susan Wright did not. So we'll have to see if these two candidates differentiate each other, and to see how that ends out. Now, Susan Wright is definitely the favorite to win because she's more moderate than Jake Ellazey, and as a result would most likely have Tarrant County, which has a lot of votes. But if Jake Ellazey is able to win, that shows that Republicans could win by not carrying under Trump's name. So that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.